The sterile lights of the medical bay flickered softly, casting a faint blue glow across the room. The rhythmic hum of monitors filled the silence, steady and constant, like breathing. Yet the man on the examination table remained unnervingly still. His chest barely rose with shallow breaths, and dark curls clung to his sweat-dampened forehead. The holographic panel above him pulsed red with urgency, its countdown relentlessly ticking toward an outcome no one could stop, except her. Zia stood over Aiden Peer, her silver-blue hands hovering inches above his unconscious form. Her alien skin shimmered faintly, reflecting the dim light, and a soft ozone-like scent lingered around her. Her violet eyes glowed beneath long white lashes as she studied his fragile human form. Outwardly, her face remained calm, almost serene, but within her, a storm brewed. Anxiety, a foreign sensation, twisted in her chest as she watched his pulse falter. Aiden's heart, so fragile compared to the robust physiology of her kind, was failing. Time was slipping away. The human medical team wouldn't return in time. It was just her now, alone in this quiet room, struggling to find a solution. Her thoughts raced. Death was not unfamiliar to her. She had witnessed it countless times during her medical training on distant worlds. Yet this was different. Aiden wasn't just another patient. That realization unnerved her more than she wanted to admit. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, carrying a tremor she couldn't suppress. Aiden had always been different. From the moment she'd arrived at the research outpost, he had treated her with kindness. While others regarded her as an exotic anomaly, fascinating yet distant, Aiden had made an effort. He had asked questions, shared quiet laughs, and on her busiest days, left meals for her without a word. Now, as he lay slipping away, the thought of losing him felt unbearable. Her jaw tightened. Not like this. She turned her attention back to the holographic display. Her glowing fingers moved swiftly, running diagnostics and algorithms in her native script. But no matter how many scans she performed, the answer remained the same. Conventional treatment wasn't enough. His heart was failing at a cellular level, the damage beyond the capabilities of human technology, or even her own advanced methods. Then an anomaly appeared on the monitor, subtle and almost hidden. Her breath caught as she expanded the data. The system displayed something improbable. Cross-species biological integration detected. Reproductive link compatible. Zia froze, her violet eyes widening. She knew what this meant. Her people possessed a rare and sacred ability to bond with other life forms, merging genetic material to trigger accelerated cellular healing. It was a practice steeped in tradition, revered and closely guarded. The room seemed to shrink around her as the gravity of the choice settled over her. This kind of bonding was forbidden with other species, even among her own people. It was deeply intimate, irreversible, and rare even under the best of circumstances. Yet as her gaze fell to Aiden's pale, drawn face, she felt a pang of desperation. His life was slipping away, his cracked lips and faint pulse reminders of how little time remained. Her throat tightened as a brutal truth surfaced. It's this, or lose him. The weight of the decision bore down on her, but deep inside, she knew what she would choose. Zia stepped closer, placing her hands gently on Aiden's chest. His skin was cool beneath her touch, his heart's weak rhythm faltering against her palms. A soft tremor ran through her, and she closed her eyes briefly. This wasn't how she'd imagined her first bonding, if she had ever imagined one at all. Her people weren't given to romantic ideals, yet something unfamiliar stirred within her. A deep, dangerous resolve. "I can save you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the monitors. "But it won't be what you expect." The room fell into a charged silence, the air heavy with the weight of her decision. Taking a steadying breath, she leaned closer, her lips brushing against his ear as she murmured, "Forgive me, Aiden." And then she began. The holographic display shifted in response to her command. Symbols reconfigured, locking into place, and the room's ambient light dimmed as the alien medical system prepared to engage. Under her hands, Aiden stirred faintly, a low groan escaping him as his body instinctively reacted to the unfamiliar process. His pulse faltered, then stopped entirely, plunging the room into an unbearable silence. Zia froze, her breath caught in her throat. This has to work. It must. Pressing her palm firmly against his chest, she willed her energy into him, channeling the life force unique to her kind. A strange warmth surged between them, electric and alive, as her pulse began syncing with his weak, irregular heartbeat. The connection built slowly, like two threads weaving into one fragile rhythm. Then it happened. A sudden jolt, sharp as lightning, surged through them. Aiden's body arched, his breath hitching sharply. His heart spasmed once, twice, before roaring back to life with a strength that hadn't been there before. Zia exhaled, the tension leaving her in a single shuddering breath. Relief washed over her, its intensity leaving her slightly unsteady. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been clinging to hope until that moment. Under her hands, Aiden's breathing evened out, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. His body was responding, healing in ways human medicine could never replicate. Tissue and muscle were knitting together seamlessly, a testament to the alien technology and her intervention. But as the warmth of recovery spread through the room, a new sensation emerged, a weight she couldn't quite name. This wasn't just a procedure. Whatever had begun between them wasn't over. The air felt heavier, saturated with an unspoken intimacy. It clung to the silence, an invisible presence in the room. Zia remained motionless, her violet eyes fixed on Aiden as he lay unconscious on the examination table. The faint hum of machines merged with the sound of his breathing, calm yet unnervingly steady after such chaos. Her hands hovered above his chest, reluctant to break the invisible tether that seemed to bind them. Something was changing. A connection, strange and delicate, was forming. She could sense him now, faint and distant, like a shadow of consciousness brushing against her mind. It was unsettling, thrilling. This should not have happened. The thought came unbidden, sharp and unforgiving, but it was too late to turn back. The procedure had worked. Aiden was alive. Yet the bond between them pulsed with something unexplainable, an energy neither of them could control or fully understand. This wasn't just medicine. It was something deeper, something primal. Stepping back, Zia wrapped her arms around herself as though shielding against the enormity of the situation. She wasn't supposed to feel like this. The bond was designed to be clinical, functional, devoid of the emotional complexities humans were so prone to. But now, Aiden's presence lingered inside her, faint but undeniable. Warmth, curiosity, and confusion, all tangled together in a way that wasn't entirely her own. And then, he moved. Aiden's eyelids fluttered, his breath catching as he stirred. His dark brown eyes opened slowly, hazy and disoriented. For a moment, he seemed lost, like someone waking from a dream they couldn't remember. His gaze roamed the room before finally landing on her. "Zia," he murmured, his voice hoarse and faint. The sound of her name on his lips sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. She stiffened, willing herself to remain composed. "You're awake," she said, her tone calm despite the turmoil brewing within her. Aiden blinked, confusion clouding his face. He tried to sit up but winced, his body protesting the effort. "What happened?" "You collapsed," Zia replied evenly, though her heart raced beneath her calm facade. "Your heart was failing. I had to act quickly." He frowned, fragments of memory piecing together in his mind. "I remember. Pain, then nothing." His gaze sharpened, his voice gaining strength. "What did you do?" Zia hesitated. Her fingers twitched at her sides, betraying her internal struggle. The truth was complicated. Humans weren't equipped to fully grasp the intricacies of her species' biology. But she couldn't lie. Not now. "I initiated a bonding procedure," she admitted, her voice quiet but steady. Aiden's expression shifted, confusion giving way to something more unreadable. "Bonding?" "Yes." She stepped closer, meeting his gaze with unwavering intensity. "It's a process unique to my kind. Through it, we can transfer life energy to another, accelerating healing and stabilizing critical conditions. It's not something I've ever done before, but I had no other choice." "So we're connected now?" Aiden asked, his voice low, uncertain. "Permanently?" "Not permanently," Zia said carefully. "The bond will fade over time unless it's reinforced. But for now, yes, there's a connection between us, a link neither of us can fully control." Aiden exhaled, leaning back against the examination table as his hand instinctively touched his chest. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and awe. It's a lot to process," he said finally, his voice subdued. "I know," Zia replied softly, stepping back to give him space. "It wasn't an easy decision, and if there had been another way, I would have taken it. But I couldn't let you die." Silence stretched between them, the weight of unspoken thoughts pressing heavily on both. The machines hummed in the background, filling the stillness with a faint, steady rhythm. After a moment, Aiden met her gaze, his expression softer. "Thank you," he said simply. Zia nodded, her face unreadable. Turning away, she let her thoughts race over the implications of what had happened. This bond was no mere medical phenomenon. It was something deeper, something neither of them was prepared to confront. Whatever it meant, one thing was certain. Their journey together was just beginning. Transfer life energy and repair cellular damage. For a moment, Aiden just stared at her, trying to fully grasp the significance of her words. Then he ran his hand through his messy hair, exhaling a shaky breath. "So you're saying we?" His voice trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "Yes." Zia's voice was soft, almost apologetic. "We're bonded now." A heavy silence hung between them, filled with unspoken tension. Aiden rubbed the back of his neck, struggling to understand the strange warmth spreading through his body, the sense that something within him had changed irreversibly. "And this bond?" He started slowly. "What exactly does it mean?" Zia paused, carefully considering her words. "It means we're connected on a level that goes beyond biology. Your body will continue to heal, but the bond also links our emotions, our thoughts, even our instincts." Aiden let out a nervous laugh, though it lacked humor. "That sounds complicated." "It is," Zia admitted, her gaze dropping for a brief moment. "This wasn't supposed to happen, but it was the only way to save your life." Aiden ran both hands over his face, letting out a deep sigh. "Okay, so what happens now?" Zia opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, a strange sensation washed over her, a pulse of heat and awareness that wasn't hers. She froze, her breath catching as she realized what it was. The bond was growing stronger, and with it came the first flickers of something much more dangerous: desire. Aiden shifted uneasily on the table, suddenly aware of the strange electric tension between them. He could feel Zia's presence, brushing against the edges of his mind, soft and alien, yet undeniably there. It was like a thread weaving through his thoughts, connecting them in ways that were both exhilarating and frightening. "Zia," he said slowly, his voice low, "is it normal to feel like this?" She swallowed hard, her eyes briefly meeting his. "The bond amplifies emotions. It's hard to control." Aiden raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips despite the seriousness of the situation. "So, you're saying this weird attraction isn't just me?" Zia's cheeks flushed a faint silver blue, an expression of embarrassment that made her look almost human. "It's not intentional," she muttered, clearly frustrated with the situation. Aiden chuckled softly, though his heart was racing. "Well, that's a relief. For a second, I thought I was losing my mind." The tension in the room shifted, no longer just awkward, but something heavier, something more charged. Aiden could feel it crackling in the air between them, quiet, unspoken possibilities. Beneath it all, the strange warmth inside him continued to grow, like an ember waiting to ignite. Zia stepped back, as though creating physical distance might lessen the bond. But the connection was already there, woven deep within them, impossible to ignore. "This is dangerous," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Aiden leaned back on his elbows, studying her with a mix of curiosity and something else, something he wasn't yet ready to name. "What's the worst that could happen?" Zia's gaze locked with his, her violet eyes full of emotions she couldn't fully hide. "If the bond deepens," she hesitated, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "it could change us both in ways we won't be able to undo." Aiden's smile faded, replaced by quiet intensity. "And if it's already changing us?" Zia stared at him, her heart pounding. She knew the answer, but saying it aloud would make it real. And once it was real, there would be no turning back. "It already has," she whispered. The hum of medical equipment became a distant background noise as Zia stood frozen, her breath shallow. Aiden's words echoed in her mind, reverberating through the fragile bond they now shared. "It's already changing us." His dark brown eyes held her gaze with a curious intensity that made her feel exposed, vulnerable in a way no training or protocol had prepared her for. The clinical detachment she relied on was slipping away like sand through her fingers, and in its place bloomed an unsettling feeling: want. Not just the biological drive sparked by the bond, but something deeper, more dangerous. Aiden shifted on the table, his posture cautious but infused with the same electric tension. He could sense her hesitation, her inner conflict, flowing through the bond that tethered them. His heartbeat quickened, not out of fear, but from the strange aura of the unknown. Whatever this was between them, it was pulling them both toward a precipice neither knew how to navigate. What the hell am I doing? Aiden thought, running a hand over his face. He had always prided himself on staying grounded, even in bizarre situations. But this was beyond bizarre. An alien woman stood before him, claiming their connection was rewriting them both from the inside out. And yet, instead of... He was trying to escape it, yet somehow he was being drawn into it. The connection between them was more than just a lifeline. It was awakening something deep and ancient inside him, something that frightened him. Zalia took a slow, calming breath, her fists clenching by her sides. She needed to stay composed, to remind herself that this wasn't meant to happen. The bond was only supposed to be temporary, a brief exchange of life force to stabilize Aiden's failing body. But it had gone deeper, entwining them in ways she hadn't anticipated. And what terrified her the most? She didn't want to stop it. Her eyes met Aiden's, and she saw something in his gaze that made her insides twist. There was no anger, no fear in his eyes, only curiosity, mixed with something darker, something that mirrored her own emotions. This bond, Aiden's voice was quiet, almost reflective. It's not just physical, is it? No, Zalia whispered, shaking her head. It's more than that. Aiden leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees as he studied her intently. What happens if we let ourselves fall into it? The question struck her like a physical blow, leaving her breathless. Let go? She understood exactly what that meant. She knew where the bond was leading them. It was no longer just about survival. The connection between them had stirred something primal, something neither of them fully understood. But her training, the rules she had always followed, warned against this. Bonding so intimately with a human was uncharted territory, full of dangers and consequences. Yet the part of her driven by instinct, the part that had sparked this bond in the first place to save him, whispered that it was already too late to turn back. Aiden rose slowly, testing his balance as he stood up from the table. His body felt different, stronger, more resilient. Even the dull ache in his chest had faded, replaced by a warmth that spread throughout his body. He could feel Zia's presence within him, like a second heartbeat, perfectly in sync with his own. He took a step closer, closing the gap between them. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, pulsing with energy as if something inevitable was about to unfold. Zia didn't step back this time. Is this dangerous? Aiden's voice was soft, a low murmur. Yes. Zia replied, her violet eyes flickering with a mix of fear and something else. It is. Aiden let out a slow breath, his hand twitching at his side, as though fighting the urge to reach out to her. But you feel it too, don't you? She nodded, her heart racing in her chest. I do. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the truth hanging heavily between them. The bond was pulling them together, an invisible force as powerful as gravity. It wasn't just physical attraction, it was instinct. And Zalia knew this was a force they couldn't ignore. Without thinking, Aiden reached out and lightly brushed his fingers along the back of her hand. The touch was gentle, hesitant, but the effect was immediate. A jolt of energy surged through both of them, a spark that made Zalia gasp. Aiden felt it too, a warmth spreading from his skin, wrapping around his nerves like a slow-burning flame. This wasn't just a touch, it was a connection, an intertwining of two souls at a depth neither of them had ever experienced. Zalia's breath caught in her throat, her mind reeling from the intensity of it all. Every instinct told her to pull away, to sever the bond before it became something even stronger. But her body refused to obey. Instead, she stepped closer, closing the distance between them until they were almost touching. This is dangerous, she whispered, her voice trembling. I know, Aiden murmured, his eyes locked on hers. But it doesn't feel wrong. Zalia swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her chest. He was right. The bond didn't feel wrong. It felt like something destined to happen, like two halves of the same whole finally coming together. And that realization terrified her more than anything. The next few moments seemed to stretch out in slow motion, as though the universe itself were holding its breath. Aiden's hand moved upwards, gently grazing Zalia's cheek, Her skin was cool to the touch, smooth, unfamiliar, but somehow it felt right beneath his fingers. Zelia closed her eyes, leaning into the touch, despite herself. The bond between them hummed with energy, resonating with the promise of something more. "We can't," she whispered, though her words lacked any real conviction. Aiden's thumb traced the curve of her jaw, sending another shiver down her spine. "Tell me to stop," he said softly. "And I will." Zelia opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. For a moment, she thought about stepping back, breaking the bond before it consumed them both. But she couldn't. "I don't want you to stop," she whispered, the words slipping out before she had a chance to reconsider. And with that, the fragile barrier of restraint between them shattered. Aiden's hands found her waist, pulling her closer as the bond flared to life between them. Zelia gasped, her body trembling as the connection between them deepened, wrapping around them both like a storm. Every touch, every breath felt amplified, as if magnified by the bond that now tied their minds and bodies together, inseparably. It wasn't merely desire, it was a need as ancient as the stars themselves, pulling them together with an urgency neither of them could resist. Zia's hands glided up Aiden's chest, her fingers tracing every inch of him, mapping his skin. Her breath was warm against his neck, sending shivers down his spine. In that moment, nothing else mattered. No rules, no protocols, no consequences. There was only the bond between them, pulsing like a heartbeat. Aiden's lips brushed hers, a tentative kiss that quickly deepened as the bond drew them closer, tighter, until there was no space left between them. And for the first time, they surrendered to it. Aiden's body felt weightless, suspended in the aftershocks of something profound. Every cell in his body thrummed with alien vitality, as if his very essence had been rewired. His thoughts blurred in a surreal haze, blending with Zia's consciousness in ways that defied reason. Her fears, desires, and instincts intermingled with his own. It was more than intimacy. It was a transformation. He lay still on the medical table, Zia seated close by, her breathing as uneven as his. Their hands remained entwined, an unspoken connection between them, even as their emotions surged, threatening to overwhelm them. The dim light in the sterile medical room cast long shadows, but the world beyond the walls seemed irrelevant now. This is more than a bond, Aiden realized. It's either a beginning or an end. Zia exhaled slowly, squeezing his hand as if anchoring herself in the present moment. Her pale violet skin shimmered slightly, a sign that her body was adapting to the change. But this change was irreversible. "We've crossed a line," Zia whispered, though there was no regret in her voice, only the weight of inevitability. Aiden looked at her, trying to understand what she meant by too far. What they had shared defied every boundary, human and alien alike. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice low with uncertainty. Her eyes met his, fear flickering behind the glowing depths. "I don't know," she replied. "No one has ever done this before." A tense silence settled between them, broken only by the faint hum of alien machinery. The silence was thick with unspoken truths, impossible futures, and the shared knowledge that something irreversible had been set in motion. Aiden could feel it in his bones, a ripple deep within his being. The connection they had formed couldn't be undone, and Zia knew it too. "This bond," she began, her voice shaky, "it's not just changing us. It's rewriting who we are." "If others find out," she trailed off, but didn't need to finish. Aiden understood the unspoken danger. Zia's people had strict rules governing all interactions with other species. What they had done wasn't just forbidden, it was unheard of. If their actions were discovered, the consequences would be severe for both of them. But there was something even more immediate that troubled Aiden. "And us?" he asked quietly. "What happens to us?" Zia hesitated, her fingers brushing the faint glow beneath her skin, the unmistakable mark of the bond's progression. "Our connection will only grow stronger," she confessed, wonder and fear mixing in her gaze. "If we stay together, we'll evolve even further. But if we separate..." Aiden frowned, sensing her reluctance to continue. "What happens if we separate?" She looked away, a faint tremor running through her. "It could kill us both." The weight of her words hit Aiden like a punch. He had anticipated complications, but nothing like this. The bond they shared wasn't merely emotional. It was biological, existential. They were no longer two separate beings. They were becoming something entirely new. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing as his mind raced. The weight of the decision before them felt suffocating. Stay together and risk everything. Pursued by Zia's people, hunted by forces neither of them fully understood, or tear themselves apart and face a fate worse than death. Damn it, Aiden muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. There's no way out of this, is there? Zia stood, moving with deliberate grace. Her once elegant alien form now seemed tinged with vulnerability, an uncertainty Aiden had never seen before. There might be another way, she said quietly. But it's dangerous. Aiden's heart quickened. How dangerous? Her gaze was steady, unwavering. We'd have to finish what we started, merge completely, become one. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Aiden swallowed hard, his pulse racing. He understood the risk. If they completed the bond, they wouldn't just be connected, they would become something new, neither fully human nor fully alien. There would be no turning back. Aiden's instincts screamed at him to flee, to sever the connection before it consumed him. But at the same time, he couldn't deny the pull, the overwhelming need to see it through. Are you sure? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Zia stepped closer, her hand brushing his cheek in a gesture that was both tender and resolute. No, she admitted softly, but it's the only way. Aiden closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, the warmth of her skin, the hum of her presence in his mind. It was the only thing that felt real anymore. All right, he whispered. Let's finish this. The final moments unfolded in a blur of sensations, electric and overwhelming, as if the universe itself was folding around them. Aiden and Zia stood together, hands entwined, as the bond surged to its peak. Their bodies shimmered with energy, the boundaries between human and alien blurring into something unrecognizable. Aiden could feel their thoughts merging, no longer two separate beings but a single consciousness, bound by instinct and desire. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. When Aiden opened his eyes, the world felt different, sharper, more vibrant. He could see every detail, hear every sound, as if his senses had been heightened beyond human comprehension. Beside him, Zia stirred, looking at him with wonder and awe, as if seeing him and herself for the first time. We did it, she whispered, disbelief in her voice. Aiden nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. Yeah, we did. They stood together in the aftermath of their transformation, their hands still intertwined. They were no longer just human or alien. They were something new, something neither of their worlds had ever seen. They would face whatever came next together, because, in the end, the bond they shared wasn't a curse or a mistake, it was their salvation.